Watch and burn.
Hey everybody! So tonight I am looking to discuss Jay Anson's second, I believe, and final novel, and that is 1981's 666 or 666, depending on how you choose to pronounce that. I always go with the very quick and efficient 666. Makes me feel more important. When I say 666, it makes me feel like I'm going somewhere, even though I'm not. But yeah, so basically, this is, of course, for anybody that doesn't know, Jay Anson is the guy who wrote the Amityville Horror. Of course, most people haven't read the book. Most people have seen the movie or they know of the movie. And he's the guy that, of course, like I said, he's the guy that wrote the book for that. And this is his only other novel. And this was released, I believe, a year after he passed away. He died in 1980, and this was, of course, released in 1981. So it kind of makes this book even a little more ominous. Now, really, I think my favorite thing about this was, aside from the absolutely killer artwork, like that reads so well, you know? My God, that's so much fun. Even though it had just occurred to me that because I do the whole Much Music MTV thing, that it's probably already up on the screen right about here. Yeah. Really no need to show this. But yeah, okay, first off, this was just about the easiest book I've ever read. Technically speaking, the easiest book I've ever read was Fight Club. I've never devoured a book that easily in my entire life up until this with 666 by Jay Anson. I motored through this book I slowed it down and I was able to hold on to the book for about 3 days. I was so enthralled by this. This book feels satanic. Everything about this feels real. So basically the story goes, two people, Keith and Jen, they've been married for a couple years. They live in like kind of a scenic place, beautiful country house, and there's a gully that separates them from sort of a vacant lot area where I suppose another house could be. And Keith and Jen are good together. Keith loves Jen, Jen loves Keith, but Jen also sort of has a thing for this dude that she knows by the name of David Carmichael, who is an antique dealer who unfortunately lost his wife during a home invasion in their apartment in downtown New York a couple years, at least I think it's New York, a couple years prior, and he's still reeling from this, but he also is attracted physically and emotionally to Jen, just as emotionally and physically attracted as Jen is to him, which does tend to cause some issues because Keith's a working class dude. Keith's a tradesman. He has his own company where he's sort of like a handyman, jack of all trades. Like he knows carpentry, he knows how to paint, he knows plumbing. You know, he seems to have his hand like in every aspect of every trade, and he seems to be really proficient at it. And yet he's obviously not rich. Whereas David Carmichael, the antique dealer, he does very well for himself. He's also incredibly good looking, even though Keith is physically speaking very attractive too. Keith always felt sort of inferior around David because David, as he ages, he seems to only look better. He's swimming in cash. He's all cultured. He knows this about this type of footstool, and he knows something or other about this sort of bookcase, and he understands, rare coins, and they come into that too. So basically, one day the house just shows up. Across the gully where the clearing is, a house gets pulled into place by the house's owner, a dude by the name of Cost, or Mr. Cost with an E, so I don't know if it's Cost or Coast. I'm not 100%. It's Coste, pronounce it however you want. He is a nefarious dude, this one. He has the house pulled here, and I believe it's just for the purpose of destroying Keith and Jen and David, because the house originally was somewhere else, and it caused a double homicide. And then Mr. Cost, or whatever the fuck, has the house transferred out here. You drive a house from A to B. Watching houses move on those giant trucks is so impressive. Like I said, boom, the house is there, and I love watching that stuff. Like whenever I catch it, I've only seen it twice in my life where I've seen them moving a house via that big ass truck with the house sitting on top of it. And like I said, it is really impressive. Makes me think of The Simpsons too, when they decide to move Springfield 5 miles down the road after Homer fucks up with the garbage men thing when Homer takes it over, and they have to move the town of Springfield a ways down, and then he's hopping over to Moe's as they're driving down the road. That's what I always think of. I always think of that. But anyways, the house appears, and Keith is expecting to be contracted to work on the house because the realtor, a dude by the name of Green, or I can't remember his first name, he always works with Keith. Keith knows what he's doing, except Keith's noticed lately business has been down. The phone hasn't been ringing, and the only call he got was from Mr. Green and through Mr. Cost, who was going to approve everything. And he wants this done to the house and that done to the house. So while Keith's in there looking around, him and one of his workers realize that they didn't brace the house. There's no like wood going across the inside to sort of hold the walls up as it's being transported from A to B. So they're figuring like, how the hell did he move this house, as far as he did? Which again, in and of itself, is ominous enough. And yeah, so basically the whole thing's set up by Satan to bait David, who is going to be very quickly, he's going to be suggested by his doctor that he should take a break. Because what unfortunately happens to David is David goes home after having dinner at Keith and Jen's house, and he finds his inner city apartment ransacked exactly the same way that it was the night that his wife was murdered a couple of years prior. And he finds this so disturbing because everything is exactly how it was. Like, the such and such that broke, it broke in a specific way. Well, it's broken again, and it's broken in that specific way. He's remembered the blood splatters, his wife's blood splatters, because I believe she was found in the kitchen. He remembers how the blood looked, and even though there's no body now, because his wife, of course, is dead and gone, the blood splatters are the same. And the detective that comes and investigates it, he's a little shifty there. He's like, did David do this himself? And I'm thinking, wow, this house is evil. Like Satan is reenacting his wife's murder again just to fuck with him. So his doctor suggests that he gets away, and he was going to rent a house somewhere else, but something messes up and he's unable to get that house. And next thing you know, he decides to rent out 666, the 666, whatever the fuck the name of the... Actually, yeah, I'm not sure what the name of the house is now because I don't remember if they named the street that it got moved to, because I know the number of the house used to be 666, whatever it was when it was in the other city, but I don't know if they ever bothered to rename it. But nevertheless, David decides to move into this house, and that's pretty much when everything just falls apart. He's walking through the place. He's realizing there's something not quite right with it, but he does really like it there. There's this odd 6-paneled room which just screams evil. It's got these custom-made stained glass windows that when Keith looked into it, he saw himself in there screaming. David looked into it, he saw himself in there screaming. And there's like something to do with like the Virgin Mary or some shit throughout these really, really disturbing sounding 6-paneled room. And the number 6 keeps coming up. There's 6 knocks at the door, and then the knocks stop. There's always 6 rings of the phone, and then the phone stops ringing. And there's this 6-paneled room, of course. And it is so honestly evil. Like everybody, like Keith sees it, I'm pretty sure Jen sees it, and David sees it. When they're on the outside of the house, occasionally through the 6-paneled room, there's a bright red light that glows from inside of it that at first makes you think that perhaps the house is on fire. But it's always discovered very quickly that the house isn't on fire, and the closer you seem to get to this red light that's in the 6-paneled room, the more it tends to dissipate. And this, again, this feels properly satanic. This feels properly satanic in a way that like Osgood Perkins movies feel satanic. Well, The Black Coat's Daughter and Longlegs, at least. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. I don't really think that had much to do with Satan. I didn't love that movie. I absolutely loved The Black Coat's Daughter. Like, Satan living in the boiler room felt so authentic to me. And at the end, when what's-her-name's like crying because she wants him to come back. Fuck. And then Longlegs. Again, it feels properly satanic. And as does this book here. This was so much fun to read. It was like the most compelling page turner I've read in forever. And I mean, it just continuously goes from bad to worse. Sorry, Keith's brother Paul, he's a minister, and he finds that his church's chalice has been stolen by this group of kids who are doing some sort of satanic act out in the middle of nowhere. And then the kid comes in and he's really open about it. He said, well, we had to steal the chalice because, and he gets into the religious aspects of it. Like if we're going to serve the great archangel, we had to steal the chalice because the chalice had to be stolen in order to sort of, do it disrespectfully enough concerning the church and yada, yada, yada. And his brother, Keith's brother, Paul, he's starting to put together towards the end of the book that this, like, what's going on here? And the kid says, just as Paul takes off to go out to Keith and Jen's place for dinner, the kid says, I just had to keep you distracted for 40 minutes. He's like, when you see your brother, believe me, you're never going to forget seeing your brother this time. He's like, best of luck. And so it's like Satan is sort of like fucking with Keith's entire family because the only two people ever really talked about in Keith's family are Keith and his brother Paul, and Satan seems to be like spreading out his tentacles and affecting Paul in this too. All the while, David is completely breaking down. He discovers an old coin that Nero would give to his men way back during Nero's reign in the Roman Empire. I think it was the Roman Empire at least a million years ago. And this coin is inherently evil. Whenever David squeezes it, he pictures people being tortured. And then David, of course, is tortured himself by having these nightmares that he wakes up screaming and occasionally trying to choke himself to death about the house. Except in his dreams, the house, the 666 house, is blue, and it's constantly shifting and morphing into various forms. It'll morph into like a guillotine, and it'll behead people. It'll morph into like a rack, and it'll pull people apart. And his dreams are so big and they're so real that, like I said, he wakes up and he's almost choking himself to death because of the reality that he's facing in his dreams about the house that is now across from the chick he likes' house. It's morphing into something, and it's like pure evil that does what it needs to and transforms into whatever it needs to in order to hurt the people in front of it at that moment. Except the house is blue. See, what he doesn't know, though, is Mr. Cost and Mr. Green have contracted Keith to paint the house blue. It's just Keith hasn't gotten to it yet because he's got a bunch of structural work and that to do inside of the house after it having to be moved from wherever it was to wherever it is they live. So before long, the house becomes blue, but by then David's sort of, I don't want to say enraptured by it. The same thing happens with Keith. No matter what, Keith can't get away from this house. And he finds that Mr. Cost, he's in Keith's office, even though the door's locked, and it's still locked from the inside, like the chain lock is on the door and everything. And Mr. Cost has dropped an envelope full of cash off at Keith's office, or some sort of communique is left at Keith's office. And it's clear that nobody has been in the place and nobody has left the place. And yet this is how that Mr. Cost dude tends to operate, and nobody ever sees this guy. He's just a voice on a phone. And even Mr. Green is surprised at the start when Keith points out, he's like, hey, you already got one of your rental signs up on the house. And Mr. Green dude's like, what? He's like, those things are incredibly expensive. He's like, he has a special type of like rent from me sign that's plaqued, and so I guess it does cost more. And he's like, that's impossible. I keep them under lock and key at my office because of their expense. And how is one already up there? And that seems to be the entire attitude that this book takes. It's just all these really ominous things happen, and nobody really has any clear explanations as to why. And in the end, David is possessed, and he turns into this like half reptile, half goat thing that's so big that when he's standing in the large 6-panel room, he still has to hunch over to keep his shoulders from touching the ceiling. And his eyes are like a foot apart. And he's already killed Keith and Jen by this point. And Paul is left. And Paul's trying to play it cool and everything. And then he sees David morph into this goat reptile monster thing. And all because at this point, Paul has the coin that David had originally ended up with, that apparently is a reward from Satan that he gives to people for doing his bidding. And so in the goat reptile form, the thing says to Paul, like, give me the coin back. And that's how that part of the book concludes with that. I believe Paul lives, but Jen and Keith are definitely dead. He destroyed them. But the book actually finishes with the detective that was looking into David, not really believing what was going on with David was legit. His daughter ends up renting the house with a couple friends. And that's how the book ends, with the detective about to experience everything that Keith, David, and Jen and Paul all experienced just prior. Now he's going to understand and I imagine his daughter and her roommates are as good as dead. There's like a 30-foot trident coming out of the fucking chimney that attracts lightning, that has all this scary shit written on it. And it's like, this house is all wrong. Another thing that's all wrong is I let this video go way too long. This book is amazing. You guys are amazing for putting up with me while I discussed it for a little over 15 minutes. I haven't had this much fun with what I guess I could classify as like a haunted house type book in forever. This is like the most satanic book that I've read in a while, or the most naturally satanic book that I've read, because I've read a bunch of books that feel very satanic, but it's with a focus specifically on being satanic. This book feels more natural. It's almost like this book isn't trying to move you into the area of Satanism and all. It's just that Satan's power is so great that it just permeates and finds its way in, and it starts to sort of spread itself throughout this entire work. And I was like fucking enthralled by this. This book is perfect. If you can track it down, it's not like the best known book. I found mine at a local Talese for like $4. If you're lucky enough to score this book, scoop it up, because I promise if you like to read, you will fire through this book in like a day or two. And that's it. I'm getting out of here because this ran way too long. So like always, thank you so much for hanging out with me for Jesus Christ, just about 16 and a half minutes. Well, no, I'm going to cut a bunch off at the start. So I'm going to say 15 minutes or so while I discuss Jay Anson's second and final novel, and that is 1981's 666. Like always, if you like this review, don't forget to go and do something nice for somebody. But most importantly, like always, never forget the world is actually a better place because you are in it. I'm getting out of here. Have a good night.